Fate. Souls and Singularities Chapter 131–132. Chapter 131. The dream and the reality. It hadn't been long since Calamate's departure, but Akal could not help but feel as though there was something else that she could be doing. Perhaps it related to this newfound sense of freedom from her past position, but it was something that she did truly wish to seize control over. She used it to support Calamate because she was genuinely fascinated by just how much he had already been affected with the presence of a Lord Soul fragment within his body, the irony notwithstanding, and how far he could truly push himself with this ideal of his. Building a kingdom for dragons, a novel concept. There was just a singular issue with it though, Calamate himself. Not that she was planning to betray him, but he was much too idealistic in his situation. Or perhaps he didn't consider the full implications of his actions. He was ill at ease with command and yet didn't quite realize how much of a natural he truly was, at least when he wasn't thinking about the concept behind authority at all. He was clear and precise with his instructions and valued the advice of his comrades without being subservient to them. Both she and Artoria had more experience with the world at large and therefore he looked to them for an education and was more than willing to learn about everything he could. It was nurturing his own ability to grow, and from what Artoria had reported back, he was already starting to facilitate some measure of creativity within him. The problem was that he hadn't quite slipped into the role of a king just yet. He was still a little too naive in regards to his own place in the world. The moment he had summoned her and Artoria, establishing himself as a master, he had assumed the role of a leader. With how he would direct the wyverns and what few dragons they had, he had assumed the role of leader. Fact of the matter was, he had become a leader without even realizing it. If he became lost in his own doubts, then their brethren would become directionless and resort to their baser instincts. Artoria had not the interest in leading them, and as for herself, she just wasn't interested in it either. Akal had spent more than enough time separated from the world and she was happy to be a part of someone else's story. This was Calamate's story and she would most certainly not let it end so grimly. Defeated by his enemies? An acceptable outcome, such was the way of life. If you seek to achieve something such as the building of a kingdom, then someone will inevitably stand against you. That was just how it was, she could accept that. But for him to be defeated by his own doubts? Absolutely not. Such a thing would be a travesty. A dragon from the age of ancients striving to build something and he is laid low by his own hesitations. It wouldn't make for an acceptable story, not an acceptable life. For Calamate to succeed, she would need to purge all doubts from his mind so that he could go about creating the kingdom he so longed for. Whether or not he actually succeeded in this matter was of little interest to her, but it was the motivation behind it that was so intriguing. It was almost like the flame kin, but that it was coming from someone who predated the very idea of ambition or ruling was intriguing. Nay, it was miraculous. Akal let out a low hum as she scratched the scales of a wyvern resting its head on her lap, the creature quietly snoozing away as though it was a child. Her eyes went down towards them as her petting slowed. Her children weren't nearly as intelligent as him, but they could learn. It would take time, but they could learn. However, their hopes lay with Calamate. If this kingdom of dragons was ever going to exist, it would only find a foundation with him. The dream was born with him, and if he perished it would die with him. It wasn't a case of success or failure, it was a case that the dream itself existed at all. That had value to her. Lives and kingdoms were fleeting, she'd seen them rise and fall so often that they all blended together at some point. Even from atop Archdragon Peak where she spent her latter years before falling into a deep slumber, she watched the rise and fall of kingdoms. But she made note of every single one of their stories despite that. Teaching humans to overcome their nature and achieve transcendence from life was for those who lacked true ambitions, who wished to be free of the pain of whatever was ailing them. It was just something that always intrigued her, how these stories came about. She'd watched the results of these dreams as they were birthed. The rise of many kingdoms, and she'd watched as the dreams fell apart along with those kingdoms, for whatever reason. However, to stand and witness as a dream was born, to see someone realize their own desire for existence in the world. That was something astounding to her. Returning to the point of Calamate, there would need to be something done to clear these doubts from his mind. To make him understand what he was aiming for and what it truly meant. The intentions might be different but the actions remained the same, at least in the end. The humans would be gone and the dragons would take their place. Akal would not lie, she feared the moment he understood that simple fact his mind would shatter with the weight of what he was doing. When that happened, she would need to be there to pull him back. Just to set him back on the right track, he'd already understood what his dream was and what he was going to do. She just needed to ensure he had the will to see it through until the end. To continue on without a shred of hesitation in his heart. Akal paused, reaching up and tapping her cheek several times. He needed someone to compete against, someone who held the same interest in reaching for the future, or even representing the future. Her tapping paused, her fingernails raked against the scales of the wyvern on her lap with the animal cooing over the attention. She felt a faint smile come upon her lips. The watchers of the stars who came from the future, that would be enough for her. Well, she could always have a look at them, gently as she could. She moved the wyvern from her lap and rested it back atop the snow before pulling herself to her feet and rolling her shoulders. Artoria, she called out, moving away from her sleeping child and towards the direction she had last seen the lancer. What direction did you say that you spotted the master and her servants? Olga huffed and puffed as she jogged along, continually being passed by some of the Norsemen as they moved past her. She flushed as she could feel their stares aimed at her as they went past, no doubt judging her for her performance. It was hardly as though she had been expected to do cross-country in a snowy wasteland when she was made director of Chaldea. Even before then the option to pursue more physical branches of magecraft was always something that was an optional course within the clock tower. Beyond that, she had seen some of those people who took the self-defense courses in action. The thought of running around and trying to compete with the likes of the Edelfelt heiress was something that would keep her up at night. She wouldn't last 5 seconds in the ring with that woman, and that wasn't even her looking down on her own abilities. It was just something that very few in the clock tower were capable of doing on their best days. That being said, you usually didn't see enforcers within the clock tower, for obvious reasons, but some of them were freaks of nature as well. Come on, Miss Animasphere. She felt her lip curl down at the cheerful voice coming up behind her. Sure enough, as she looked to her right, the looming form of Tarkus came up next to her and slowed his pace. The fact he had still gotten her name wrong time after time was something she was probably going to give up on trying to correct. If only because she didn't know if idiocy like his could be cured. You're doing really well. Those words would have felt pandering or false from anyone else. If there was one thing she was at least thankful for, it was that Tarkus was like Fujimaru. He was too incapable of lying. She suspected that Fujimaru could lie. Nearly everyone could. He just didn't. At least he didn't to her. Whether that was because he was a terrible liar or because he understood that lying to your boss was a terrible idea, she couldn't tell. It might well have been a mixture of the two. Focus on your own work. Olga responded to Tarkus, or rather she at least tried to. She was somewhat out of breath, leading to the sentence actually sounding something along the lines of, focus on her own work, in a wheezing voice. The silent gaze from Tarkus' helmet was all the proof she needed that he had absolutely no idea what she had been attempting to say. As the helmet slowly turned away from her, she felt the redness on her face shift from being one of exhaustion to one of complete embarrassment. They'd only been jogging for about 30 minutes and she already felt like dying. The stretches that the Lancer had them doing did nothing to help her in the least. She was certain that the Norse didn't feel that way, but at the same time, she wasn't an axe-wielding Viking who was about a year away from murdering Christian monks and stealing their possessions. Your readings are looking. Pharaoh's face popped up next to her, staring at something to her side before shrugging. I think these are normal. I honestly couldn't tell you though, she said after a moment before pressing several more buttons. Hey, Roman? How are these looking to you? Romani's face popping up, and already looking as though he hadn't fallen asleep, did little to fill her with confidence. They're more or less within our estimations. The doctor said after a moment of examining them. Your heart rate is a little high, but you didn't really do that much hardcore exercise. The man paused. At least, nothing on par with literal cross-country. Forget about that. Olga choked out through another breathless speech. The doctor frowned at her for a few seconds before she continued on, Fujimaru. Romani pursed his lips and looked to the side, which was obviously a bad sign and not the thing she had been looking for. We've still got nothing, and with Fujimaru still not yet in communication with us, we can't do anything on our end but continue to try and break the barrier. He rubbed his forehead in exasperation. Da Vinci is still working on it though, so there is that. Olga furrowed her brow for a moment before she had an idea. What about the summoning that brought Lancer to this singularity? Romani pursed his lips and shook his head. That was one of the first things that Da Vinci had us try, didn't so much as let us lock on. Da Vinci thinks it might have something to do with the interference that's preventing communication, letting us get an accurate lock on. We could afford it with Fujimaru-kun because he is a solid individual in the world. A servant requires an anchor. Pharaohs chimed in, we basically slingshot him at the singularity and the servants got dragged along. Romani sputtered and coughed. Did you have to phrase it so violently? You make it sound like we just threw him there without a care in the world. The caster gave an unapologetic shrug. Anyway, we could establish a temporary and really weak anchor in Denmark because of where you are and the lack of resistance, but in London? She gave a grim shake of the head. Any anchor we tried to establish would fizzle out almost instantly before we even thought about sending a servant down there. It is a case of just waiting until Fujimaru contacts us. She was silent for a moment before she gave a cheerful smile, but if anyone can find a way, I'm sure it's Da Vinci, as expected of my rival. Romani pinched the bridge of his nose and shook his head before he lowered the hand. That aside, the readings from Fujimaru-kun are starting to bug me a little, if I'm being honest. He explained with a nervous look on his face. Olga gave him a suspicious glance. Worried how? I don't know if it's me just being overly cautious, but it's just that, he shrugged, they just seem really good for what has been going on the last few days. The man leaned forwards, crossing his arms on the desk. They ray-shift down into a singularity and get all but cut off from us, and in all that time they're just showing evidence of a couple skirmishes? That gave Olga pause as she considered the line of thinking before giving the doctor a dubious look. You mean to suggest someone from a singularity is feeding us false data? She didn't even attempt to keep her incredulity from her voice, showing exactly what she thought of that suggestion. With a shake of her head, she cut that off. No. It is more likely that the one who has caused the disturbance has not yet revealed themselves to Fujimaru and is playing it safe in order to avoid a direct conflict with them. Especially considering that ruler has high magic resistance and 2 casters he took with him being skilled. Romani considered the argument for a moment before he nodded his head. Well, yeah, that does make more sense to me. He exhaled. Sorry, just getting a little jumpy at not hearing from him is all. Likely because you look as though you have not yet rested. Olga remarked with a frown. Munier. She called out through the communicator. Yes, Director. The man in question called back, his muffled voice reaching the communicator. Put Romani on a 5-hour break of mandatory leave, you are in command until he returns. What? Romani squawked. I'm telling you, I'm fine. Clearly not, if those bags are any indication. Olga cut him off before he could even attempt a counter-argument. And I will not risk you falling asleep on your desk. A crisis does not give you an excuse to forego any sort of attempt to care for your own health. It puts both yourself and everyone else at risk. She paused for a moment, then shouted out again. Operator Carey. If he does not take a rest, tell Da Vinci to find some method of getting him in his bed and asleep. She didn't quite understand why Romani's face burnt bright red and the woman in question howled with laughter in the background. I am sure she can find some way to tire him out, Carey wheezed in the background. Olga squinted at the screen, now noticing that Pharaohs was close to giggling as well. Oh, or worse. Carey choked louder. Maybe she'll make sure he doesn't get any rest at all. Ha 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 ha. Now the entire control room was close to being in a state of giggles. Hee ha ha ha. She looked to the right. Tarkus was jogging next to her and quietly chuckling as well. She continued to stare at him in silence before he noticed her looking and quickly averted his head. I don't get the joke, but I thought it would be best if I laughed anyway. He quickly explained in an embarrassed tone of voice. Wait, are they bullying the little blue man? He asked after a moment. Fine. Romani exclaimed as he sharply stood up. I'll have a nap. Just stop laughing. He called out as he turned around and all but scrambled his way to the door. Don't send Leo to my room. Olga watched him depart, then stared at the blonde man in glasses plopped himself down in the seat Romani had been on, flicking his hands across the desk to clear it of something as his laughter died down. Hee hee hee, hee hee hee, hee hee,
Munir rubbed his face and coughed before looking towards the director and composing himself as best he could, not completely able to hide the twitching of his lips though. Anyway. The man coughed again. Da Vinci left a message that if she got a breakthrough, she would immediately let us know.
Good. Olga nodded after a moment. Then I expect her to do so. Keep an eye on those readings from Fujimaru and inform me of any changes. Yes, Director. One more thing? Yes, Director?
Do not make crass jokes in the control room during an emergency. It is a time for professionalism.
Olga herself didn't actually know if they were making crass jokes or not, but she imagined that they were. Especially given the way that it got the entire room to act as though they were children. With a shake of her head, she turned her attention ahead of herself once more and turned off the communicator. You slowed down. Olga almost screamed at the sudden voice behind her, whirling around and seeing Torin approaching her at a slow pace. Something wrong? Issues at Chaldea. Nothing more. She replied quickly before she turned back around and stumbled forwards, attempting to find her proper pace once again, although swiftly finding herself near the back of the convoy as many of the, admittedly healthier, Norse had already passed her. Torin was silent as he came up next to her, not looking at her directly, although the woman could feel his eyes on the side of her head as she jogged. Although at this point it had degraded into a faster than average walk. You've done better than I thought you would have. It took Olga a second to register the words before she felt her lip curl downwards. What were you expecting? For you to collapse 10 minutes ago and need someone to drag you onwards. He responded in a toneless voice, the words delivered so brutally and casually that Olga almost didn't think he had said it. When it became obvious he had, she felt her temper spike. I didn't want them here either. She growled in a low voice, mocking me won't change that. I know. Torin said after a moment of silence, and I was not mocking you, I was giving my honest opinion. Which I didn't ask for nor do I want it. Olga cut him off sharply with an edge in her voice, her jaw rolling from side to side. If you just came here to tell me how little you expected of me, then go away. You're a servant, you don't even need to do this. The caster fell quiet for nearly 10 seconds before he spoke again. I can't go near them right now. HMPH. Olga grunted quietly. So what? You hang around me? I can't go near them because they're going to die and I can't face them. Torin said after another moment. You don't. You haven't lived with them like I have. He continued on, his voice remaining blank. So I didn't want them here because I'm going to have to watch them die. Whether we win or lose, some of them are going to die. I can't change that, so no, I didn't want them here and I couldn't convince them to leave. I can't either, apparently. Olga huffed to herself, a hollow gesture as there was no change in the emotion. Neither of us can, it seems. He grunted before shaking his head. Well, I suppose it doesn't matter thinking about it now. What's done is done. The man remained silent for a moment before he continued on. Chaldea is the name of the tribe you lead, yes. What issues face you now? Olga remained silent before she gave him a raised eyebrow and a puzzled expression. Why should I talk with you about this? The people I lead are about to march to their deaths. Torin bluntly responded. The least you can do is tell me what troubles ail you. That way I can at least confirm that neither of us are in ideal positions as far as leadership goes. Olga stared at him for a few seconds longer before she exhaled and looked away from him. The two fell into a short silence before she exhaled and looked to the sky. My situation is far worse than yours. I'm sure. Torin scoffed. So what dragon are your people off to fight? He asked rhetorically before he looked to the side. You are here and yet you look almost as downtrodden as I. One can only assume your subordinates are in a similarly dire situation. I don't even know what sort of situation they're in. She gave an ugly laugh as she picked up the pace. That's the problem. She remained silent before she spoke again. I'm not going to talk about this more. It doesn't matter to our current situation, so there is no reason in discussing it. Torin followed after her. If you say so. He shrugged his shoulders. Should I go and fetch the queen? You appear to have a good repertoire with her. At the very least you can speak as you run. That should serve to distract you from the exercise. The fact she didn't actually respond to that question was all that Torin needed as a way of a reply. As silently as he could he broke away from the woman and moved on ahead. Nodding his head once to Tarkus as he passed him by and then disappearing into the crowd of Norse.
Tarkus slowed down once again to be level with the director. Are you actually not used to this sort of thing? He asked in a genuinely perplexed tone of voice before he turned and looked away. Sorry if I didn't notice.
Olga leveled him with an annoyed look. Did my panting not clue you in? Everyone always got like that when I ran with them though, he replied in a confused tone of voice, tilting his head slightly. I thought that was normal? Sir Berenike always called me a stamina freak. It's not, it's TCH, never mind. She exhaled, utterly unable to find the energy to speak with him about the subject only because doing so would be like banging her head against a wall. I'm not sure what you meant to say, but I'm certain you're doing a really good job. Tarkus applauded her with a cheery voice. Considering you aren't even a knight, I think it's pretty impressive you could actually make it this far at all. He added on a comment which was thoroughly unneeded in her opinion. I mean, my mother could probably keep going, but she used to help work the fields and carry around big bags of wheat, so she was nearly as strong as me and was also called a stamina freak by father, although I never actually saw her run. Now that I think about it, so I don't get why he called her that. Olga felt her brows slowly rise up as Tarkus continued to speak. Anyway, you're a noble woman, right? We don't normally see princesses. Now her eyes were wide and her lips were drawn into a thin line, running around everywhere, so I think it's even more amazing. Actually, are you a princess? I only ever heard about princesses and stuff in stories, so I never thought I'd actually meet one, but then Miss Marie and Miss Nero are both queens, right? So I don't know if a princess is that impressive, unless this was going to be something. Are you like a really important queen? Tarkus asked in a low voice. Because that would explain why Miss Marie and Miss Nero do what you ask. I mean, I know we're all servants, but it would make a lot of sense. Also, the small blue man treated you like a superior, so maybe you are a queen, he gasped. Is Chaldea like your kingdom? Olga had zero idea how she was supposed to respond to this rapid-fire rant. She actually managed to withhold a sigh of relief when she saw Marie dropping back from the crowd of Norse and falling into step next to her. I've never done so much running in my life, Marie quietly confessed to her with a slightly strained expression. Olga soon noted that her posture looked more like she was skipping through the snow than anything close to resembling an actual running posture. Normally I go on horseback, but then Lancer started talking and I felt enthused by it. The French writer giggled. It was really something, it just made me want to scream, yeah, at the top of my lungs. Olga huffed quietly. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. I'm making the most of my situation, Marie replied before she looked left and right, then leaned towards the director. I've actually been talking with some of the people to get their opinions. She had. That was surprisingly insightful of her, although she wasn't sure what manner of opinions they were going to get. Well, Olga whispered back, Hemming thinks that Brynjar has a thing going for Joran. Marie whispered in a conspiratorial tone of voice, but Bjarne says that Brynjar is obviously pining after Frigg because she makes some of the best stews around, so he's mad that Torni made off with her. The woman then gave a confident nod of the head. Huh? The director did a double take at the writer, brows furrowed and expression genuinely shocked. What? Why are you, what? Ooh. Tarkus made an interested noise, causing Olga to jump as she suddenly found him well within her personal space and his attention on the writer as well. Really? I thought they were friendly with each other, but I didn't think she had a crush on him. Exciting, isn't it? Marie nodded her head rapidly, clearly pleased that Tarkus had jumped onto the topic of conversation. I was thinking that they were already a couple, but it turns out that. What are you even? Olga closed her eyes and snapped her jaw shut, exhaling before her eyes opened once again, her voice in a similarly low whisper. What are you even talking about? I thought you meant you were getting a read on the moral of the people, the general feel of the situation. Marie blinked once. I did. They are very interested in discussing Brynjar's love life. She snickered. There's actually some debate between Hemming and Randolph right now. The writer explained. Hemming thinks that Brynjar will tell her before long, but Randolph thinks that Joran will actually jump him in his tent tonight if we don't get attacked. Tarkus nodded his head several times. We should probably protect him then, just in case she tried to attack him. Both Olga and Marie turned their heads to give the man a dull look. What? Tarkus looked between the two of them with an innocent voice. Did I say something wro? This is one of those things I don't understand, isn't it? The saber realized with a wince. She's not actually attacking him, is she? Marie bit her lip and shook her head. Well, if she does, it certainly won't be in the traditional sense.
She'll poison him. No, you fool. Olga snapped at him with a shocked expression. She was aware he was simple, but surely he had some inclination of where. Her eyes widened slightly as she considered that. Do you even know where children come from?
Tarkus remained silent for a moment before he nodded once. Yes. He replied in such a way that it became painfully clear that he didn't know where children came from. Olga looked down to the tapping noise and noticed that his fingers were repeatedly tapping against his palm and producing a metallic drumming noise.
Her eyes trailed up to the helmet and saw that he was facing ahead, clearly attempting to avoid looking directly at them. Marie stared at him before she opened her mouth and spoke again. Do you want to have another go and make the answer more convincing? She sounded genuine in her attempt. Despite that, Olga clearly picked up on the mirth in her tone of voice.
No, Tarkus slumped his shoulders, his arms dropped to his side and he jogged like an armored monolith. I don't know where babies come from. No one ever told me. Mother said she would tell me when she was older, but she died before she could. Father died before her, so I couldn't find out from him either. No one else would tell me either. They just laughed and walked off. That took a turn neither had been expecting from him. Olga released a shaky breath before she reached up and cupped her face, groaning into her hands before lowering them once again. All right. I can't let this go on. She grumbled, turning her attention to Marie with a flat expression. I refuse to entertain this ignorance any longer. You're right. Marie gave a sage nod of the head, turning to Tarkus. So when a man and a woman love each other very much, she suddenly tensed and widened her eyes, her head snapping to the front and sliding to a halt with Tarkus doing the exact same. Servant incoming. Munier all but shouted as the communicator flashed to life once again. They're at least 3 miles 2 mil 1 mile. His eyes widened. They're virtually on top of you. A crash from up ahead of them was accompanied by a mushroom cloud of snow extending at least 15 meters into the sky. Olga raised her hand and covered her face as the shockwave hit her. She could make out confused and alarmed cries from up ahead as she lowered the limb. Berserker, she called out. The armor responded immediately, the huge body coming into existence next to her with the axe and shield already in hand. Without waiting, Olga rushed forward. Servant. She cried out again to alert everyone else, although they were likely already aware. Torin's voice came out nary a moment later. Emissaries to the front, stay behind us. Olga kept running, watching as both Tarkus and Marie sped right past her as they entered the crowd of Norse, pushing them aside as they moved to the front of the line where the cloud of debris was already starting to settle. When she got through, she noted that the other servants were already present and in battle positions, brandishing their weapons towards the tower of falling snow. Movement caught her eye. They instantly narrowed as she watched a humanoid figure emerge from the layer of falling snow that was enveloping them. The first thing she noted was that they were somewhat tall, taller than her at least, probably around Ash's height if she was to guess. The figure, clearly a woman from her physique, rolled their right shoulder several times as they faced them. She was dressed rather in line with the current era. A wide leather strap across her chest to protect her modesty while also exposing her virtually Amazonian muscles. Her right arm was adorned in a mangled steel pauldron that looked as though it had been pushed in place to actually fit its new position. Each arm had leather bracers around them, a set of dull brown fabric trousers, leather boots and a ragged cloth around the waist. What attracted Olga's attention, though, was the head. Beneath the scraggly brown locks of hair were a pair of curled horns extending from either side of the head. The woman's vibrant brown eyes flickered between all of them meaningfully as a cordial smile played upon her features before locking onto her in particular. The woman took a sniff of the air, closing her eyes before she paused and gradually opened them up again. So you must be the opposing master. Red flags almost instantly. Enemy servant. Olga declared. The tension of the group skyrocketed as she looked around for a split second and noticed they were by themselves. I came alone, if that is what you're looking for. The woman continued on in a rather knowing tone, all the while that unconcerned smile was on her face as she fussed over her bracers as if to make sure they hadn't fallen off. I know, more or less, who you are though. Divination and the like. She paused for a moment before shrugging. Or rather, I just don't think like you humans. No shit. Cu snorted by her side as his lip curled back, nice horns you got. Hey. The woman smiled as she raised an eyebrow at the caster. Is this what humans call flirting? In that case, I like your eyes, she responded back, which actually prompted a blink from the man in question. They're a lovely shade of red. A shame about the smell of divinity that lingers around you. Cu shrugged, meh, you get used to it. Well, I'm sure you won't be around long enough for me to have to. She chuckled, though her words were clearly hostile. She didn't hold a shred of aggression in her voice. Are you here to fight us? Olga demanded, looking around and then back at the servant with a dubious look. By yourself? The brunette shifted her attention back to Olga and tilted her head slightly as she crossed her arms over her chest, subtly flexing her muscles as she did so. By myself. Though fighting you and testing you can be considered two different things. For one, I'm not aiming to kill you, she replied easily enough. Before Olga could even attempt to dissect that sentence, the woman suddenly charged towards them. She zigzagged as nothing but a blur of movement, leaving behind a trail through the snow as she rapidly closed in. Olga widened her eyes and scrambled backwards as she was upon them in but a second, already swinging her left fist towards the nearest servant. Brynhildr caught the fist with the flat of her spear before pushing the servant back, then widened her eyes as she felt the resistance give out much too easily. She watched as the enemy woman leaned back with the shove and then curled her body backwards and rested her right hand on the ground before she pushed herself into a backflip while swinging her legs up. The Valkyrie leaned backwards to avoid catching an armored boot to the chin while the woman landed on her feet and smirked. Fighting with this body is much faster than I thought it would be, she idly commented as she stared at her hands, then back at the group. I suppose this is a test for all of us then. She leapt into the air, crushing the ground beneath her feet as she sent herself skywards. Her face shifted into one of determination as she identified her landing point and then aimed towards the person in question. Olga whirled around to face the Norse, shouting out as loud as she could, "Fall back, you're just in the way." Torin charged the servant, swinging his axe up at the same time her feet fell down. The two crashed into one another before the enemy servant kicked the axe backwards, used the momentum to knock herself away. As she flipped, she aimed both arms behind herself before suddenly releasing an explosion from each of her palms and rocketing forwards like a missile. Her knee crashed into Torin's face and sent the pair of them ragdolling across the ground. The woman was the first to recover as they landed, grabbing hold of the larger caster and righting herself on her feet before spinning on her feet and hurling him towards the group. Come on, she called out to them, don't just stand there. Marie grabbed Olga and pulled her down as Torin sailed over their heads before she snapped her head back to the servant. Stay back, master, Marie demanded in a much more serious tone than Olga had been used to as the girl extended her enlarged rein and swept it through the air, throwing forth a blade of faint pink wind towards the servant. The woman didn't so much as blink as the magical attack struck the air a foot from her body and vanished into nothing. Long-ranged, is it? The servant muttered before she turned and raised up the back of her right arm and blocked Nero's burning sword. But you're not, she exclaimed in a pleased tone. And fire? She gave a throaty chuckle as she shoved the sword to the side and then grasped a hold of it with her left hand. Nero widened her eyes as the flames coating her sword were suddenly snuffed out. The servant raised an eyebrow at her. Why would you use such a thing against a dragon? She asked before swinging her leg up and burying it in the emperor's gut. Nero wheezed as she rolled away, righting herself quickly and snapping her head up to face the servant once again. Gordon's heart was in his throat as he charged forwards, the great sword in his left hand dragging through the snow and slicing a clean valley in his wake as he moved. Just keep moving. Those were the words that repeatedly drummed around inside his skull. If he stopped moving for even a second, then he was undoubtedly going to die or end up getting crippled. The latter option was just as bad as the first because it would likely lead to the first. Not that he was afraid of dying, given what had occurred already. To allow him to become a heroic spirit, it would be rather ironic, but that wasn't why he was afraid. The way the dragon, the legendary black dragon pulled right from the stories of ancient history, was fighting, it was becoming rather obvious that after he died then it would move on to killing everyone else. It was fighting with blind rage, not skill, just rage.
He dropped down, allowing his momentum to carry him forwards and sliding through the snow as the large shadow cat was hurled over his head. The giant beast, which likely weighed more than he could guess, was flung over his head as though it was a common house cat. His eyes darted up as its body ragdolled past him. Gordon was back on his feet the moment the shadow passed above his head, not even turning around when the beast crashed into the ground and caused the surroundings to tremble ever so slightly. His eyes fixed themselves on Calamate once again as he resumed his run.
Calamate spun on his heel, whirling Leto above his head and tossing him away before whirling around and focusing on him. Red eyes glowed and the central orange diamond shape menacingly glared at him. His inner knowledge that came from the god of war told him to avoid that eye at all costs. He didn't know why, but if an actual god was telling him that being in the dragon's line of sight was a bad thing, he wasn't going to rush and question it. Bringing the greatsword around, he slashed through the snow and released a small burst of light from the weapon, throwing up a cloud of ice into the air and directly into the dragon's face to break their line of sight with one another. It was risky. Now he couldn't see what the dragon was doing, but he was confident that he could. His head snapped to the side and his eyes widened to dinner plates behind his helmet. Time seemed to slow as a fist the size of his helmet burst from the snow and rocketed towards his face. The layer of burning yellow fire coating the limb only served to further terrify him. His body leaned at an awkward angle as he watched the fist close in, now finding himself nearly 45 degrees to the side and virtually falling backwards as the fist whizzed past the top of his head. Gordon grunted as time seemed to resume. Calamate's body burst from the snowy cloud and his head snapped down to lock onto the knight as he fell back into the snow. Scrambling backwards, Gordon swung the sword up and slashed out at the large leg that was closest to him. Calamate recoiled the limb back as a mere flex, then resembled glaring at Gordon as he brought both his hands above his head and clasped them together. Sigurd slammed into his side, tackling the dragon and then using a dagger in each hand to secure himself into the body of Calamate. The servant roared as the knives pierced his armor and sank down to the hilts in his flesh. Jerking his hands in emotion, Sigurd twisted the daggers and then slashed them across, spilling more dark blood onto the snow and then kicking the side of the thigh to launch himself away while Calamate staggered from the blow. Jumping to his side, Sigurd quickly sheathed the dagger and grabbed Gordon by the shoulder before yanking him up. "We must buy more time for the others to get away," he whispered to him as Calamate grabbed the slash on his gut before withdrawing the hand and looking at the blood. "They are not yet gone and he can still catch up with." Calamate waved his hand outwards. Mustard flames leapt from his arm and rushed towards the pair. Sigurd jumped backwards while Gordon jumped up to avoid them, soon becoming the wrong thing to do as Calamate hurled himself skywards without even pulling his wings out and wrapping a giant hand around his face. Spinning through the air, Gordon was left with nothing to do but simply get ragdolled by the larger servant as they approached the ground. Calamate pulled the arm back and then swung downwards as they approached, slamming Gordon into the ground with a tremendous crash, the pair of them disappearing in a cloud of debris. Sigurd raised his hand to cover his face as the shockwave hit before he lowered the limb, eyes wide. "Gordon." As if to answer the question, the knight in question went flying through the air and far into the distance, then Calamate came bounding towards him from the falling snow. Eye glowing bright orange, Sigurd felt himself assaulted by fatigue once again and taken hold by some sort of phantom grasp. Calamate closed in, sticking his legs out and sliding to a halt while cocking his right arm back and extending his claws out to take a swipe at the man. Leto's hammer smashed into his left side, shunting him to the side the moment he got close enough. Sigurd felt himself freed of the influence. The second he did, he rushed forwards and threw one of his daggers into Calamate's ribs, cocking his right fist back and then throwing it forwards and smashing his knuckles into the pommel of the dagger and outright shooting it through the body of the dragon. His fist smashed into the body and staggered the larger servant backwards. The Silver Knight pulled the hammer back and spun on his heel, sweeping it through the air and aiming it upwards. Sigurd jumped out of the way as the hammer closed in. Calamate grunted as the weapon struck his gut and folded over it, being knocked backwards and off his feet. Leto turned to Sigurd and spat out a wad of blood into the snow. "This is not a fight we can win through brute force." Turning back around, the pair watched Calamate straighten himself out and roll his arms several times. then directed his attention downwards towards the apple-sized hole that was running through his entire body before he returned his attention onto the pair in front of him. "I know," Sigurd muttered back, flexing his hand and calling Graham forth. "But we have precious little choice. If worse comes to worse, I shall use my noble phantasm on him. We appear to have gathered at least some distance." "Hopefully," Leto grumbled, looking over his shoulder quickly to see the large black cat still slumped on the ground. "It's not dead, is it?" "It has yet to fade away. I would say no move," Sigurd interrupted himself, diving to the side as Calamate kicked off the ground towards the pair, both his arms clasped above his head and burning brightly. Leto let out a bark of laughter and charged forwards, holding his hammer with both hands and dragging it through the snow as he charged towards the flying dragon. The two rocketed towards one another as Leto brought the hammer up at the same time Calamate brought his fists down. The two attacks smashed into one another and exploded in a ball of yellow flames. Leto skidded along the ground like a stone across the lake while Calamate was hurled backwards by the momentum of the explosion, spreading his wings wide and controlling his flight and looking to reacquire the pair of them. With a snarl, Calamate dropped back down into the snow and retracted his wings before he resumed his march forwards, only stopping when he caught sight of Gordon charging towards him from his right side. Raising his arm up, he blocked a downward strike with the back of his arm, growling slowly as the blade sank an inch into his armored scales before he jerked the limb and parried the blade. Swinging his left arm forwards and aiming it down to Gordon's head, the knight ducked low and rolled forwards to avoid the punch. Calamate stepped back and kicked him in the side as he was midway through the roll. Gordon coughed as he was thrown from his opponent, sticking his right arm out and clawing at the ground to slow himself. Calamate charged forwards, taking a single step before he saw the ground beneath his feet glow for a split second. He tensed his body and jumped back. Icy spikes burst from beneath the snow, soon snarling and glaring at Gordon once again as the knight withdrew his right hand and shook it several times to remove the snow covering his gloves. The saber righted himself and gripped his sword tightly, assuming a high guard stance with the sword slightly angled and pointed up towards the dragon due to his superior height. With a growl, Calamate rushed forwards, swinging his claws with reckless abandon and no sense of style. Gordon was instantly forced onto the back foot and scrambling backwards as each blow sent him staggering, his sword swinging from side to side in an effort to block the oncoming blows. Calamate threw a straight jab. Gordon angled his body to the side and raised his sword up so the fist glanced along the edge of the weapon and slashed itself open on the blade. Not that Calamate even seemed to register the wound as the jab continued on and smashed into his right shoulder. A popping sound echoed out with Gordon giving a sharp intake of breath and his right arm falling limply at his side as he stumbled backwards. Not giving him a chance to retreat further, Calamate stepped closer into the guard and swung his leg up and into the wounded side of the knight. His right arm bent with the impact and this time he cried out in pain as his right arm jerked in a direction that the limb was not supposed to bend. Gordon was bowled over and sent rolling across the snow as Calamate lowered the limb. Swinging his claws down, he buried them down to the wrist in the snow and then superheated his fist with fire. Turning around, Calamate roared as he swung the fist upwards and hurled scaling water in the direction of Sigurd as he charged forwards. The knight ran through the offensive without so much as flinching as the skin hissed on contact. Graham was brought to bear on the dragon. Calamate's eye atop his head glowed, halting Sigurd in his tracks once again with the knight grimacing before he pushed himself onwards with a noticeable strain upon his features and swung towards the dragon. Calamate lashed out with his claws, smashing his hand into the sword and recoiling as the weapon split open his left hand with terrifying ease. Sigurd stamped his foot down, reversing his grip on Graham and bringing it back around as he ducked under Calamate's right side and had the sword headed straight towards his gut with the clear intention of bisecting him. Twisting his body, Calamate managed to avoid the worst of the damage, instead being mitigated to having his side slashed by Graham before delivering an elbow strike directly into Sigurd's face. The knight dropped down instantly, moving to get back up only for Calamate to roughly grasp him by the throat and hoist him into the air, Graham slipping from his fingers as he was jerked upwards. He was barely eye level with Calamate for a split second before he yanked the short sword from his belt with his right hand and brought it up in a reverse grip before slamming it down into Calamate's opposing shoulder, The dragon jerked backwards as Sigurd clenched his right hand into a fist and slammed it down into the pommel of the weapon to send it even deeper into the dragon's flesh. Recoiling, Calamate released him only for Sigurd to pull the second short sword from his belt and drive it into his gut. His right fist pulled back and was swung forwards like a hammer and drove the second sword further into Calamate's gut and forced the dragon even further back. Not that the dragon was idle either. With a roar he swung the back of his arm out and caught Sigurd in the chin with a strike. The knight flipped through the air as a result of the blow before roughly crashing into the snow. Calamate stumbled backwards, his hand falling onto the sword lodged in his gut and grasping his claws around the handle before yanking it free of his body with a grunt and tossing the weapon away. As he reached up for the sword in his shoulder, he was sent staggering forwards as something slammed into his back. As the dragon turned around he caught sight of Leto pulling the hammer back and preparing for another blow. The sight of the Silver Knight was enough to send him into a second frenzy. With an enraged snarl he charged forwards with his claws extended and slashed at the knight. Leto raised the polearm of the hammer, the claws clashing against it and grinding against the metal as he pushed down against the knight. With a grunt, Leto shoved the claws to the side and pushed the dragon back as he swung the hammer back around, striking Calamate in the chest with the back end of it. Tanking the blow, Calamate brought his other hand around and slashed his palm into the side of Leto's head. The berserker grunted but failed to go down. With a bark of laughter, Leto swung the pole of the hammer upwards and parried another fist to the side before he lashed out with a heavy kick aimed at Calamate's inner thigh. Wincing slightly, Calamate moved back before he rushed forwards and swung his arms at the Silver Knight. Leto planted his hammer into the ground and twisted it around to act as a shield, leaning backwards as blow after blow rained down upon the hammer. With a final roar, Calamate brought his left arm back and ignited it with burning yellow flames before swinging it forwards and smashing it into the weapon. The fist exploded and sent Leto flying backwards as he made to follow, only to stop and hiss as an icy chill spread across his legs, holding him in place. The dragon snapped his head down and glared at the thick layer of ice that now covered his feet all the way up to his shins. Twisting his head around, he found himself staring towards the dark-haired woman as she stared at him impassively. He could faintly make out the glow of her red eyes as she extended her left hand towards him, willing the snow and ice to cover his body. Bringing his fist up, he ignited it with flames and prepared to bring it down in order to shatter his restraints. Then froze when the woman spoke. "For how long shall you throw this childish tantrum of yours?" The cold words had him frozen solid, his head slowly turning back to the woman and staring at her. "What? You claim to be a leader?" The woman narrowed her eyes, lowering her hand. "Someone who might claim the title of king, yet such words were enough to send you into a rage? You speak of things you do not know," Calamate growled, lowering the arm, "and I will not be." "You retract your words so swiftly?" Alsana continued onwards. "Is that what you expect from your kingdom? One who would claim to build a kingdom?" She gestured around them. "Is that what your groundwork shall be? A king who will so quickly say he holds no aggression to those who would not oppose him and then within the span of a minute declare his intentions to kill all regardless of their position?" Calamate stilled before his eyes glowed red. "Do not. Hold your tongue, boy." Alsana spoke swiftly and cut him off. "You claim to be enraged by the actions against your race, yet commit the same acts against the humans of this land? Is your kingship motivated by mere hypocrisy?" "I am nothing like them," Calamate roared, stamping forwards and tearing his legs from his frozen prison as he whirled on Alsana, waving an arm in the direction Leto had been knocked towards. He butchers my people and doesn't even question why?" he roared. "There's no grand dream, no inner desire for betterness, he just killed them." Alsana raised an unimpressed eyebrow. "And your own wyverns are visionaries such as yourself?" "Of course then I am grateful for your faith in my children, but as much as I love them, not a single one would ever consider what it is that you are doing now." The words of a call struck his mind like a drum. His mouth remained open but not a single sound emerged from it. That was more than enough for Alsana. "Your hesitation in answering has already marked your defeat in this argument." She scoffed loudly. "But if you still wish to continue this angered fit of yours, then you can swing your fists and preach your delusions until the sun sets." Calamate wasn't actually hearing anything of what she was saying, his mind still reeling from the words of a call which haunted him. No, he declared loudly, bringing a raised eyebrow to Alsana. No, that is not, Calamate growled and furrowed his brows. That cannot be right, they all know. They all know, they believe in the same as me, they must or, with a shake of his head, he turned on Alsana and pointed at her. You're trying to cloud my mind, to make me doubt myself. Alsana leveled him with a disappointed look. Are you so foolish to truly believe these words, or do you merely spout them to try and make yourself believe such things? Calamate growled at her louder but didn't say a word, content to merely glare at her for a few moments before giving another fierce shake of the head. No, my motives are not so shallow. All my brethren understand what we are doing. They must. I am doing this for them. They have to understand what I am achieving, or I'm. His voice trailed off, breaking down into a quiet whisper as he stared at her in an almost distant fashion, or else He pressed his palm into his chest. I'm different. I don't seek the complete extermination of humanity. And that is to provide some comfort for those who already live here and have died. Alsana responded with a flat tone of voice. Though you will be forced from your homes and scattered to the winds like vagrants, take solace in the fact I shall end my aggression when I have stolen all that once belonged to you and made it my own. Did that provide solace to you, Calamate of the Ancient Dragons? Where has your confident tone gone? Alsana pressured further. Have you no further words to add? Are you not a king? Should you not defend yourself from these accusations I make? What manner of king falls silent in the face of an aggressor? Calamate stared at her blankly for a few moments, then looked around to see the other servants picking themselves up and looking towards him. Without making a single sound, Calamate spread his wings wide and launched himself into the air before banking left and shooting off into the distance as fast as he could. The servants watched her leave before Sigurd slowly turned his head back to Alsana and exhaled. That was impressive? You think so? Alsana seemed to deflate, her posture losing the confident aura it had held moments prior. I acted how my king would. It brought a great many emotions to me when I saw such contradictions, especially from one who claimed to be a leader. She paused for a moment before shaking her head, and I will not deny that perhaps his nature allowed me some influence over his mind and convinced him to leave. Ah, your divinity was stronger than his. Sigurd realized with a wry chuckle before he groaned and clasped a hand over his chest, dropping down to one knee and giving a heaving cough before spitting out blood into the snow. I shall not complain about it for now, but making him doubt himself could have repercussions. Naturally. Alsana gave a grim nod of the head. Now that he knows of them, I fear he might try to correct them, and such a tactic will not achieve success a second time. If he understands his position and embraces it. Sigurd closed his eyes. Then he shall not stop until we are dead, but I do not believe he will pursue us for the time being. No, he will not. She looked around before she turned her head back to Sigurd. You are all injured and we need to regroup with the others. I told Eric to lead them on ahead while I returned for you. Sigurd laughed as best he could. I am grateful that you did. His mystic eye was something I had not initially accounted for until it was used. He closed his eyes and gave another wheezing cough. You should find Gordon, I believe him to be more injured than I. Another cough from Sigurd was her reply before she thinned her lips. She hadn't truly been expecting them to depart, but the words felt as though they needed to be said. Come on, the servant called out as she zigzagged once again, this time closing in on Tarkus before she paused midway through and jumped back to avoid a thrust from Brynhildr. The white-haired woman maintained a cool face as she spun on the self-proclaimed dragon and started to attack her with a series of swipes and jabs. The servant blocked most of the attacks. Those that got through scored small nicks in her flesh but nothing more, and they gave no indication that they even felt them if the unchanging expression on their face was any indication. Brynhildr noted that they hadn't even tried to pull out a weapon, but they appeared much too lucid for a berserker. The woman grabbed her spear by the polearm. Brynhildr jerked it to the side and spun it, slamming the metal grip against the side of the woman's face as she did so before stepping into her guard and slamming her shoulder into them, soon followed by a kick into their outer right knee. The unnamed servant's expression remained unchanging throughout all of it, that same amused smile on her face as this was all some joke to them. Brynhildr brought her spear back around to slash at their neck, then paused and widened her eyes as she felt the mana around them suddenly shift. Back lass, Siyu's voice called out from behind her, Something she was inclined to agree with as she kicked upwards and launched herself as far back as she possibly could. A bolt of lightning shot beneath her feet seconds later, and she watched the expression on the servant change for the first time from casual to terrified for a split second. Their palms exploded and consumed the lightning with bright orange flames before the woman charged out of them, swiftly closing in on the caster. She was stopped midway through her charge when Stahl slammed an axe down in front of her. It had been aimed at her, but she'd kicked herself backwards to adjust her speed and avoid it just before it could land. Ha! Nero flew in from the side, sweeping her sword down and scoring a thin cut across the woman's left arm, not that she even reacted, as she maintained her focus on the berserker. Her hand snapped out and caught Nero's sword, pulling it forwards and dragging the Emperor as she turned on her heel and threw a fist at the blonde girl's head. Nero ducked down, avoiding the punch before twisting her sword and pulling it free of the servant's grasp and splattering the snow with blood as she managed to score a decent cut on the palm of the servant. Stahl ripped their axe from the ground and gave a clumsy swing at the servant. The woman leaned back until she was virtually parallel to the ground and watched the axe sail above her head before she snapped back up. Brynhilde dropped to the ground behind her, aiming her spear at her while the others closed in. The servant looked around, still seemingly uncaring at being surrounded before she cracked her neck. This is a test, after all, she muttered to herself before everything about her suddenly shifted. The snow was visibly displaced as waves of mana were expelled from the servant. Such a release meant they were becoming much more serious now. An servant Calamate has encountered a 404 error and has restarted. In all honesty, yeah, sucks to be him right now. Also more insight into Akal's way of thinking. The beginning and the end doesn't interest her as much as the story in the middle. The getting to witness the idea that leads to all of it is just a special treat on top. She's not like Proto Merlin though, as she doesn't get genuinely invested in the story as it plays out, taking on an active role within it. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 132. Newfound determination. Tarkus staggered backwards as a series of blows glanced against his armor. With a grunt he swung his tower shield up and parried the next right hook skywards. Drawing the shield back he thrust it forwards and smashed the ridge of the shield into the chest of the servant. The woman took 2 steps backwards from the blow, raising an eyebrow at the knight. Her left arm came up and blocked the downward slash with the greatsword. The weapon buried half an inch into the leather bracer. The woman cracked a smirk as she drew her right arm back and thrust her palm forwards. It cracked against his chest and knocked him much further back. The woman danced away as the spear of Brynhilde pierced the ground. The woman spun around on the weapon and performed a roundhouse kick aimed at her chin. The back of her armored heel cracked against her jaw and snapped her head to the side, directly into a glancing blow from Nero's burning sword. The red blade earned a slight cut on the cheek and caused the servant to step back once again. Brynhilde brought the spear back around, swinging it into the servant's gut and knocking her backwards. Nero kicked off the ground and brought the sword above her head as she came back towards the ground. Brynhilde dragged the spear along the servant's gut, earning a thicker slice than last time and turning the woman from the momentum. Nero fell upon the servant, her sword crashing into the shoulder and burying an inch into the collarbone. With a sharp smile, the woman reached up and grabbed the sword in her shoulder and held it in place. Her knee swung upwards and buried itself in Nero's gut, earning a wheeze from the saber. The enemy servant then turned her head towards Lancer, leaning her head to the side and avoiding a thrust aimed for her face. A sharp blow staggered her forwards and had her loosen her grip on the sword and stagger forwards. She turned on her heel to the new attacker, finding herself staring at the blue hair and red eyes of Cu Chilane, the man grinning sharply as he retracted his burning staff before flipping it around and implanting it in the ground. A burning circle flashed in the snow. The arm of the wicker burst upwards with its fingers clenched into a fist. The wooden limb collided with her chin and sent her flipping through the air. Her face remained casual as she spun without any clear control, turning her head and noticing another blur moving through the air towards her. Torin loomed above her with his weapon swinging down and drove the head of the axe into her side. A second later a shock ran through her body akin to an earthquake. With a boom, she was sent rocketing down to the ground and crashing into the snow. Debris exploded all around her from the point of impact, lying down and breathing in and out as she stared up at the sky. "That's rather wonderful," she exclaimed as she sat up, looking around and staring at all of the servants. "No, really, it's wonderful and I'm glad you're all taking this seriously. You were expecting us to take it as a joke." She turned towards the voice, looking up just in time to see the head of Torin's bronze axe rocketing towards her face, reaching out with her fingers outstretched. The axe collided with her palm and stopped dead in its tracks. Snow shifted around them as the shockwave rippled through the air. "Not bad, not bad," she praised with a sage nod of the head, her fingers tightening around the axe head and then her eyes darting to the left side and smiled a little wider before dragging the weapon forwards. Torin stumbled with the movement and then saw where the woman was looking, promptly widening his eyes behind his helmet and raising his free hand and holding it out to stop Stahl's large leg from impacting his body. The berserker halted just before impact, freezing on the spot as if it had been unplugged. The servant smirked. "Dear me." She swung her right hand up and released a jet of fire into Torin's gut while he was distracted. The sudden explosion at point-blank range punted him away from her as she turned away and crouched into a running position before she kicked off the ground and launched herself forwards. Her shoulder crashed into Stahl's chest and carried the pair of them forwards. Sticking her foot out, the woman dug her boot into the ground and slowed herself down as Stahl continued on. "Stop yourself!" Olga shrieked in the background. Stahl swung their axe downwards and embedded it in the ground, dragging the weapon through the snow and slowing itself down as best as it could. HMPH. The woman thrust her hands into the ground as far as they could go before ripping a large chunk of rock, approximately 2 meters across, from beneath the snow and leaving a crater at the base of her feet. With a grunt of exertion she spun around to face the group of humans and made an obvious motion of preparing to throw it at them. Tarkus punched her in the face with the hilt of his greatsword. The woman's head snapped back and bone crunched as he very clearly broke her nose with the impact. Despite that, her hold on the boulder didn't loosen at all, rather she adjusted herself and swung it downwards directly onto Tarkus. The knight disappeared beneath the rubble for a few seconds before the rocks fell away, revealing his body, covered in dust, but otherwise perfectly unharmed and unmoved from the attack, directly where it had been. The woman blinked once at him. "All right." The Tarkus kicked her in the gut. The woman folded with the blow and found herself skidding across the snow, glancing across the ground several times before she impacted shoulder first and was dragged through by the force of the kick. Sticking her hands out and clawing her fingers, she halted her movement and snapped her head up, cracking her neck once and standing once again, maintaining a close eye on Stahl as they pulled themselves back to their feet before her eyes flickered over to Olga. "So that's how it is." Tensing herself, she lowered her body in preparation for another charge. Focusing her attention solely on the director, something the white-haired woman noticed if the way she took a half-step backwards and shifted her expression from determined to frozen like a deer in the headlights was any indication. "Not so fast, lass," Cu shouted out, waving his hands in front of himself and hurling forth a dozen bolts of lightning at the servant. The woman reacted instantly, stamping her foot down and bringing up a wall of flames around her. The lightning cracked against the new barrier, tearing out chunks and exposing her form but otherwise doing little else. But it served to get her attention as she drew her right arm back and hurled a ball of flames towards the caster. Cu remained stationary as he twirled his staff and thrust it forwards. A pillar of ice rose from the ground and struck the attack head-on. Sweeping her arms around, the woman swung them in such a way that the flames surrounding her were fanned outwards in a wide circle, charging out of them a split second later and charging straight for Olga. Olga started, widening her eyes and scrambling backwards as the servant closed the distance with her at a rapid pace, then suddenly twisted her body and kicked off the ground, performing a cartwheel in the air and looking down with a smile. Brynhildr looked up at her as her spear passed through the air where she had been. Twisting her body, the enemy servant shifted herself to require Olga as a target only to blink when she noticed the woman had vanished. Her eyes attempted to reacquire her, only to halt as roots burst from the ground and wrapped themselves around her ankles. "Oh!" She widened her eyes before she was suddenly dragged downwards. Her body cracked against the floor as more roots burst out to entangle her arms and waist to keep her from moving. Her body erupted with flames, fire coating every inch of her skin as she laughed. burning away the restraints in a split second. But for a servant, a split second was all that was required. Torin swung his axe into her side once again. The blade dug into her flesh before the weapon roared and the woman was violently shunted from the axe as if she had been punched, ragdolling across the ground and then finding herself getting mule-kicked in the face by the glass horse that Marie and Olga were currently riding. She didn't make a single noise as she was struck, her momentum shifting to carry her back the way she had come. Nero charged in, swinging her sword and cutting another line across the woman as she passed her by, then stamping her foot down and making a sweeping motion with the sword as she spun on her heel to face the servant once again. Estes struck her in the side of the head and spun her again, carrying her away from the Emperor. Brynhildr kicked off the ground, launching herself into the air directly above the flying servant as the arm of the wicker burst from the ground, courtesy of Cu, and grabbed a hold of her to stop them from moving. Twisting her spear, Brynhildr aimed it downwards so that it was directly aimed to pierce the chest of the enemy servant, then dropped down like a rocket as magical energy coated her weapon. The sound of crumbling stone filled Brynhildr's ear. A second later she watched as a giant ghostly arm that looked as though it was made from rock formed directly in front of her with its fingers opened wide. She had barely a moment to register it before the palm of the giant hand crashed into her and wrapped its fingers around her body in a crushing embrace. The limb swung her down, swatting her flat into the snow before it retracted back. "What the she?" Cu cried out in alarm before another ghostly hand formed directly in front of him in the shape of a fist and rocketed towards him. The caster abandoned his spell and leapt to the side, watching as the fist ripped through the ground where he had been standing moments prior. The servant ripped her way free of the wicker arm, kicking off the crumbling summon and hurling herself into the air, her eyes rapidly darting around as she looked for the next target she could engage with, soon landing upon Torin as he stared up at her with wide eyes. With a grin, she twisted in the air and halted, floating a few meters from the ground and drawing her head back as her mouth opened up. A new shape formed just behind her, skin of crumbling stone, skull-shaped like an arrow and twin horns jutting from the back of the head. The fanged maw of the dragon head opened wide as the back of the throat started to glow. Torin stared up, frozen rigid and clearly incapable of doing much more than staring up at the visage of the dragon bearing down on him. "Throw something at her!" Olga cried out at the top of her lungs, foregoing any sort of subtlety in commands and just being desperate to stop the servant before it could unleash their attack, something that was clearly not going to be very good if the cut-off head of the dragon was any indication. A second later, the circular shield of Stahl flew through the air like a discus, crashing into the enemy servant and bouncing off her as she flew backwards from the force of the impact. The pair struck the ground at the same time, the servant rolling backwards and getting into a crouched position. She darted forwards, zigzagging through the ground before she made a beeline right towards Tarkus. The knight raised his tower shield to block what he thought was going to be a shoulder charge. The woman ducked to the right at the last second, appearing around the shield and swinging her left knee upwards. The kick crashed into his side and swept his legs out from underneath him. Tarkus made a surprised noise as he fell. The woman then drew back her right leg and swung it forwards like a hammer. Her boot smashed into the center of the shield and sent Tarkus sliding through the snow before she found herself immediately on the defensive as Torin, Brynhildr and Nero jumped her at the same time. The woman blocked an axe blow from Torin with her arms. Nero stabbed her in the side with a thrust. Her hand swept out and batted the red sword away from her body. Brynhildr smashed the butt of her spear over the back of her head. Torin's fist caught her in an uppercut. Her head snapped back as Brynhildr swung her spear around and smashed her in the sternum, folding her over the blade of the spear. Nero's sword swung into the bridge of her nose and slashed open the flesh around her face in a horizontal line. She staggered backwards, raising her forearm and blocking Brynhildr's next thrust. She shoved the spear upwards and lashed out with a quick jab that caught the lancer in the face. Leaning backwards, she avoided Nero stepping into her guard and slashing down with the sword. She retaliated by swinging her right elbow into the Emperor's nose and was rewarded with a crunching sound and a gasp of pain. Torin kicked her in the gut and knocked her backwards, following the attack through and thrusting the polearm of his axe into her face and snapped her head back. He drew the axe back and slicked down into her knee, catching her in the thigh instead from the steep angle. Again, the shuddering lurched through her body and forced her down. Brynhilder's heel collided with the side of her head, catching her just above her right eye and forcing it shut. The woman twisted herself, using the heel on the woman's head as leverage as she swung around and smashed her other leg into the back of her head, forcing her to faceplant the ground. Torin raised his axe upwards, poised to deliver a killing blow onto the servant. Her hand lashed out like a viper, clamping down around his ankle like a vice and holding him right. Torin felt his body lurch as he was suddenly pulled along with the servant as she shot to her feet, swinging the taller man above her head like a flail and towards the lancer. Brynhilder widened her eyes and ducked down, watching as Torin flew just above her. The servant gave a cry as she brought Torin into the ground with a shuddering boom, then swung him backwards and into range of her fist as she brought it up. Torin had just enough time to catch sight of the limb rocketing towards his face before it smashed into his helmet with a metallic crunch as steel bent inwards. Torin's head was punched deep into the ground as the woman drove him down like a hammer. Her hand snaked back as she whirled on Brynhilder. "Out of the way," Olga called out. Brynhilder didn't question it as she rolled to the side. The enemy servant found herself staring at her own warped reflection in the body of the charging glass horse with both Marie and Olga sitting atop it. The latter had her arms tightly wrapped around the former's waist with a mild look of restrained panic on her face. The horse trampled her, glass hooves struck her skin repeatedly as the animal bucked back and forth atop the servant. Each strike rewarded them with a meaty thud as the servant was driven further and further into the ground. "Berserker!" Olga called out at the top of her lungs. "Hit her as hard as you can, Caster, keep her pinned." "Ha! Now you sound like a master. I can definitely pin her down," Cu called out as he twirled his staff. "I'd rather pin you down," the enemy servant called out from beneath the horse. Cu fumbled after hearing the remark, blinking in confusion for a split second. The servant beneath the glass horse lashed out. Her knuckles cracked against the underside of the summon and shattered it instantly. The force blasted both Olga and Marie skywards. Cu stumbled as he aimed his staff towards the sky, attempting to cast runes in order to slow their descent. He stopped midway through and was forced to duck away in order to avoid being struck by a fireball launched by the servant. The woman rolled onto her hands and knees, looking upwards and locking onto Olga before she shoved herself off the ground and into the air. Her eyes flashed to the side a split second before she was about to take off, widening ever so slightly as the shadow of Stahl fell over her. The berserker's giant axe already swinging down towards her, racing to split her in half. Foregoing the opportunity to chase down the master, she instead twisted on her heel and raised her arms up in a cross guard to cover her face. The axe of the berserker impacted, her skin split as the momentum behind the attack instantly knocked her down and into the ground. The earth split with the weight of the strike. The woman bounced once as the axe retracted itself, wrenching free of the flesh and bone of the limbs and revealing the mangled left arm of the servant. Despite the damage that had been done to her, the expression she made didn't so much as waver. Olga continued to spiral through the air, her arms flapping wildly at her side as if she was imagining herself about to fly any second now. A thin pair of arms cupped under her legs and the back of her head, catching her in a princess carry and stabilizing her in the air. The woman instinctively threw her hands around the person who caught her, making a panicked cry as she descended towards the ground. The two thudded down, the person carrying her taking up the brunt of the impact. Olga snapped her head to the voice just behind her, finding herself staring at the bruised face of Nero. Her nose slightly crooked with a line of blood trailing down over her lips from her nostril. The Emperor's voice was nasally, as one would expect from a person who just had their nose broken. "You're unhurt, master?" Olga rapidly nodded her head. "Excellent," Nero beamed, shifting her position and standing the director back on her feet. "I had never caught someone like that before, so was a touch nervous." She whirled around, brandishing her burning sword once again and pointing it in the direction of the enemy servant. "Now then, this one is quite the tough barbarian." Keep the pressure on her," Olga hastily ordered, "we have the numbers advantage." Stahl was launched upwards as the servant jumped directly up, swinging her right arm and crashing her knuckles against the chin of the helmet. The berserker's feet left the ground as the woman twisted in the air, coiling her legs backwards and then rocketing them forwards into the chest of the servant, drop-kicking them away from her and into a roll. As she fell back to the ground, she twisted around once again to land back on her feet, then turned her attention onto her left arm and raised an eyebrow at its limp state. Her right arm moved to cradle it, bringing it up to her attention as she gave it a once-over.
Huh, well then. With a shrug, she let the arm fall back to her side as she refocused on the servants. Let's. Tarkus' tower shield cracked her over the back of the head, the servant having thrust the base of it like a spear. As the woman stumbled forwards with the impact, she turned to protect herself from the follow-up attack. That gave Brynhildr the opportunity to sweep her legs out from underneath her, sliding in from behind and kicking her in the back of the knees.
Whoa! The woman gasped as she felt herself lurch backwards, her eyes widening in surprise before they focused on Tarkus as she saw him reverse his grip on his greatsword and hoist it upwards, shouldering his tower shield and grasping his weapon with both hands as he thrust downwards in conjunction with her falling body.
Her right hand came up as the sword descended, grabbing the tip of the blade as her back touched the snow and stopping it before it could be pushed further. At least for a short moment, her face started to show the first signs of stress as Tarkus pushed the sword downwards, the blade slipping through her fingers and blood already running down its surface as her skin on her hand was cut open. Tarkus leaned in, putting more of his weight behind the sword and slamming his left hand on the pommel repeatedly like a hammer to drive the sword down further, aiming directly over her heart area as he did so.
The woman looked into Tarkus' helm, staring at him for a few moments before she flashed him a winning smile.
Then shoved the sword to the side as he hammered in the next blow and let go. The man felt all resistance vanish as he body fell forwards with the strike. The woman's expression didn't so much as change as the sword was driven through her left shoulder and burying the tip into the ground behind her. Her legs snaked back and Tarkus felt himself fall onto her boots as they pressed up against his chest.
HMPH, with a grunt, she kicked with all her might, hurling Tarkus at least 20 feet in the air from the power behind the blow while she was forced a little further into the ground. She watched as he ragdolled through the air, hastily reaching up for his shield and slinging it around in front of himself as he dropped back towards the ground like a brick. His armored form collided with the ground in an earthy thud as the impact kicked up a flurry of snow around him.
Her right elbow swung down, cracking against the dirt and using the force to push herself from the ground. Almost swinging up at a 90-degree angle until she was back on her feet, still smiling as she looked at the long back sword which had penetrated her shoulder and appeared out the back of her body. She reached up, clasping the weapon by the blade and pulling it out, not making a sound as the sword was gradually ripped from her body. Crimson red dyed white as the blood seeped from her wound and poured onto the ground below.
With the sword finally free of her, she tossed it almost lazily over her shoulder as she turned back around, then gestured to her arm. "I'm happy you're all giving 100%. She said after a moment. "It wouldn't be much of a test if you weren't trying."
"What nonsense are you spouting?" Olga all but demanded as he called out from behind Nero, her face a mixture of shock and outrage. "Test? This isn't a test. You're a danger to humanity itself and you think too. I don't feel too strongly about humanity one way or the other." The woman cut her off before she could continue, shrugging her right shoulder. "I'm actually more affiliated with humans than I am with my own children," she remarked with an amused curl of the lip. "That's ironic." As for the test itself, she pursed her lips and rolled her jaw from side to side, looking at Olga curiously. "I take it you're the leader here?" she called out to the woman, reaching up with her right hand and tapping her chin with her index finger as she cocked her head to the side in an almost cutesy manner. If her body didn't look as though it was going to fall apart, then it might have had more of an impact. "I mean, I can tell you're the physical weakest, but there's a trace amount of magic from you. Shared amongst all these servants, that makes you the master, right?" Olga thinned her lips for a few moments before she nodded once, taking a deep breath and puffing herself up. "I am Director Olga Marie Animosphere of Chaldea," she boasted before leveling a finger at the servant. "For the sake of humanity's future, I intend to defeat you and all those who follow you." The woman stared blankly at her for several seconds, then lowered the hand from her chin. The silence continued on, Olga pointing at the servant and everyone else remaining quiet with their eyes flickering between the two of them. "Yeah!" Tarkus shouted out from somewhere behind the servant. Although his voice sounded somewhat strained, Olga noticed that he was in a sitting position but he actually hadn't gotten up yet.
Nero nodded, an impressive declaration, pale rose. Olga felt her cheeks start to flush with what was obviously pandering. It's a simple call that gets the spirits up, Marie chimed in from somewhere else. I think it's a very good battle cry. That felt less pandering, at least. The enemy servant was staring at her somewhat oddly now, looking her up and down and squinting her eyes. I have been out of touch with human naming conventions for some time. But have humans really taken to naming their children over plants? She asked in a puzzled tone of voice. Still, white flower. Olga choked, her eyes going wide. She could swear someone was stifling a chuckle nearby before they quickly ceased. If you are going to give me your true name, then I should at least respond in kind. No, she pointed her right hand towards herself. I am Akal, descendant of everlasting dragons and mother of dragons. She lowered her hand and smiled. I suppose it comes as no surprise which side I am on, does it? What the heck? Munier called out from the communicator, is this how things normally go? The person behind the singularity just showed up. Wait. What is TH? The man trailed off, widening his eyes slightly. Director, she doesn't possess the Grail. She has an impressive saint graph reading but no sign of the Holy Grail at all. What? Olga whirled on the man, staring at the small screen with a shocked expression before her eyes fell back upon the servant standing opposite her. How? But if you're claiming to be the mother of dragons, shouldn't— She dismissed the idea with a shake of her head. Never mind that, she pointed at the servant. Surround her, make sure she can't get away and prepare to finish her. You're rather brutal, aren't you? Akal couldn't help but raise an amused eyebrow at the woman before shaking her head. Still, though, I suppose I should have expected as such. Humans don't really respond accordingly at times. The response can be disproportionate. I came here to test you instead of kill you. Your words and your deeds are at odds with one another, Marie declared with a disapproving frown. You have already said you're the mother of the dragons here, so they are acting as you would direct them to. Even if you didn't come here to kill us, you've already participated in burning so much of this country. Is there not some human adage about sins of the father? Akal responded with a tilt of the head and a wry smile. Does it not work in reverse? The sins of the parent are not that of the child, and the sins of the child are not that of the parent. You've done a piss-poor job of reining them in. CU hollered out to her with a curl of his lip, so you either don't give a shit or you're letting them do it, which is it. I just birthed my children, they are free to do, or follow, whomever they so desire. She responded in an ominous tone of voice before turning her attention onto Olga and giving her a faint smile. Still though, I like to think I've gotten my answer. Fighting for humanity's future, you say, white flower. All right, that's a very good reason. I look forward to seeing what will happen when you two meet. Until then, she waved to them, then paused when she saw roots burst from the ground and wrap around her legs, holding her in place. You don't get what is happening here. Olga called out to her, tightening her hands into fists. You're a clear and present threat in this singularity, and by your own words, it is because of you that wyverns run amok. Even if you might not be holding the Grail now, there is no doubt you are with those who do. Ah. Akal smiled. You intend to slay me now, is that right? Olga's silence was answer enough. That is fair enough. We are enemies as it stands, and we will inevitably have to fight once more. The servant reasoned with an understanding nod of the head, not appearing too put off with the prospect of death looming over her. That being said, the servants under Olga's command had been reduced somewhat. Torin's head was still driven into the snow and the servant hadn't moved since that occurred, which meant he was clearly unconscious, and for whatever reason, Tarkus had still not stood up from his seating position. That left them with Cu Chilane, Brynhildr, Nero, Stahl and Marie to combat the servant, and she had already demonstrated some prowess in physical combat as well as being rather durable given how much work had already gone into injuring her this much. Her right eye was still clenched shut. Slashes and bruises littered her body and her left arm hung limply at her side. Despite that, her face expression remained much the same, no hint that she had been injured at all. Killing me now would be a smart move, if only so that you would not have to fight me later and being accompanied by my allies. Akal continued onwards, her eyes scanning each and every person present. Though, I'm not sorry to say, I doubt you will be claiming my head this day. Olga narrowed her eyes at the woman. I'll be sure to carry your message back to my king though, White Flower. Akal hollered to her with a smile. I have every confidence he will find your declaration very interesting. A battle for the future? We'll have to see whose determination is stronger then. Stop her movements. Olga called out instantly, pointing to the servant and darting her eyes over to see you. The caster registered the command and reacted swiftly, thrusting his staff forwards and unleashing a series of runes that impacted the ice. The symbols glowed bright blue before the snow melted into water and rushed towards Akal like a river. The servant tensed her legs and prepared to jump upwards. Brynhildr charged forwards and bounded into the air above the servant. Akal raised her forearm in preparation for the strike. The spear blade collided with her in the air and knocked her back down, her feet becoming soaked as she splashed down into the water. Gotcha! Cu gave a victorious smirk as she slammed his staff into the ground once again. The water solidified and creaked as it turned to ice within a split second. Akal felt her legs turn stiff as the water vapor around her similarly froze and her feet became encased in the icy prison. Get her, boys! He called out. A pair of white wolves summoned themselves next to him and bounded towards the servant. Akal widened her eyes and looked away from her feet for a split second as the wolves crossed the distance towards her in scant moments. Her right hand flew up. Her palm glowed a brilliant orange and steamed as the temperature around it rose significantly. A blur of movement caught her right side as she saw the giant armor bounding towards her. She would either be attacked by the wolves at the front, the giant armor on the right, or the lancer in the air poised to fall down upon her. She was in quite the difficult situation, and Akal doubted that her high endurance would allow her to get away from this in one piece. She'd already managed to learn everything that she wanted to, so remaining her wouldn't serve much purpose anyway. From before the flame my ancestors take flight. Akal called out. The mana in the air swirled towards her as she deployed her noble phantasm, time, light, dark, cold, heat, all worthless before the eternal stone scales. The moment the three parties were close to her, the air suddenly and rather violently rushed outwards. An explosion of air and snow ripped its way from the enemy servant and sent the entire party flying back. The shockwave rushed towards the Chaldean group as a whole. Olga had just enough time to take stock of the sudden explosion before she found herself suddenly ripped off the ground and hurtling through the air. She found herself breathless as the shockwave struck her like a fist, air ripped from her lungs and leaving her without the ability to even scream. The world flashed around her in slow motion as she ragdolled, her limbs not responding to her commands and unaware of how far she was actually moving. A flash of bright pink was all she knew before she collided with something soft and a thin pair of arms wrapped themselves around her body. Then she felt a shock run through her entire system as she and whomever grabbed her hit the ground. She was ripped from the grasp of the rescuer and haphazardly sent rolling through the snow. Olga wasn't sure how far she rolled, only aware of the mix between finding herself staring up at the sky and being buried face down in the snow. Then the cold hit her. She desperately wanted to pull herself free of the frozen ground but couldn't find the energy to so much as move her limbs. Her breaths came out as strangled gasps as her body desperately tried to pull oxygen into itself but failed each time, not least of all because every time she did she pulled snow into her throat. A hand grabbed her shoulder and flipped her over, finding herself staring up at the sky with wide eyes as the face of Marie stared down at her with a look of shocked concern on her face. Master! Marie all but shouted in her face as she grabbed her shoulders, then noticed the snow lodged in her mouth before her lips tightened and she turned Olga onto her side and started to strike her on the back. The repeated motions eventually got Olga to start coughing, spraying snow from between her lips. She did so repeatedly. The rider stopped hitting her and took her hand away. Olga, are you all right? No, Olga croaked before she could really help it. The idea of putting up an image of calm didn't even occur to her once as she continued to cough, pausing to take in greedy gulps of air with her breathing degrading to panting. What ha? A roar split the air. No, to call it a roar would have been to speak lowly of its intensity. It was a thundering noise that flooded Olga's entire being. Her bones felt as they were vibrating inside her body and shaking the very earth itself. The rumbling noise akin to a jet engine continued on without fail. Olga's hands flew to her ears and cupped them to try and block out the noise. The attempt was met with failure. The titanic cry pierced her meager defense and continued its assault on her ears without any sign that her efforts mattered in the least. She clearly wasn't the only one as she saw Marie stumble next to her and cover her ears with a pained look upon her face. Outstanding. The voice shook the air, the vibrations of the tone quaked the ground with each letter uttered. Olga remained curled up on the ground, not wishing to move herself for a few moments before she slowly turned her head and looked over her shoulder. The blood left her face in a split second. To think you would force me to use this form of mine? I'm impressed. Humans truly are interesting little creatures. The creature of stone extended well over 100 meters into the sky. Great clawed hands shifted and pressed upon the earth. 4 titanic wings spread either side of the mountainous body as the arrow-shaped head on the end of the snake-like neck twisted around to look down at Olga. I'm satisfied with this development, more so than I would otherwise be. The body shattered, crumbling away into dust and fading into motes of light. A call stood in its place, a rather tired look on her face as she rolled her shoulders. I much prefer this body now, but it's still a little strange to me, really strange. She flashed the group a smile. Still though, I did say this was fun. Her right hand was drawn across her left side before swinging it in a wide arc. Fire leapt from her fingers and impacted the snow with a hissing noise. Steam erupted from the ground and concealed her form away from prying eyes. Olga scrambled backwards as she saw a shadow burst from the snow and rushed towards her. A call suddenly paused, her right hand ducked down and scooped something off the snow before 4 stone wings emerged from her back, hovering just above her skin, and then launched her into the air. Until next time, Chaldea, she called out to them once again, flying higher and higher into the sky and leaving the group behind to pick themselves up. Olga panted heavily, staring up at the sky with wide eyes and parted lips before a whimper escaped from her throat. What was? Artoria had heard Calamate return. She suspected that they all had. Even if she hadn't, his next actions would most certainly have roused everyone from their slumber. Wyverns shied away from her as she marched towards the base of the arctree, the smaller beasts cowering away from one they viewed as a superior. This would not work with the few dragons that remained, but at the same time, it didn't need to. She would keep her distance from them and they would afford her the same courtesy. They all understood that they were more or less upon the same side. What mattered most of all at the moment was the racket that Calamate was kicking up. He'd been screaming at the top of his lungs since he returned, and Artoria had been electing to ignore it until his cries had turned more desperate, almost like a child screaming for his mother. For him to afforded the title of king and then devolve into whatever that state was, it was beyond words. Her own pride could not stomach the idea of this display any longer, least of all from the one who was her master. There had to be a certain level of dignity involved. A call. Calamate's words became more easily distinguished as she got closer, his voice rumbling from the inner sanctum of the archtree and echoing out across the home they had made for themselves. She noted the complete lack of wood, which implied that something had occurred while he was gone. She stopped walking when she noticed splotches of dark liquid in the snow. Her eyes narrowed behind her helmet as she stared down at them with sudden understanding. Blood. Her eyes rose up from the mess and noted that the blood accompanied the imprints of Calamate's clawed feet in the snow, advancing on the tree. Which meant he had also been wounded as well. It would make sense as to why he would return without the supplies he had set out for in the first place then. It would have been a servant he encountered, or perhaps a group of servants. Her lips thinned as she considered it, resuming her pace. It could well have been those she fought earlier, but the time frame was wrong. They had been many miles south when she encountered them, and that was a little over 2 days ago. For them to make that distance in such a time would be rather impressive. Not outside of the range of possibility though, if they had been traveling alone. Perhaps the master saw fit to part ways with the humans they had been escorting and followed her trail back. That would have been possible and certainly a tactic she would approve of. There were more lives at stake than a single village population. If they truly wanted to save all Denmark, then they would have to make sacrifices for the greater good. There was another possibility, and one that was more likely, in that Calamate had encountered the knife-throwing dragon slayer. They had lost sight of him for some time and had little way of knowing where he was. It would make more sense for Calamate to have encountered them if he was returning wounded. A call. Where are you? Calamate's voice roared from within, his tone foregoing all measure of composure and cracking into desperate pleas. A call. Cease that whining at once. Artoria ordered as she stepped foot inside of the archtree, locking her eyes onto Calamate instantly and noticing the slashes in his armor and the holes that ran through his entire body, specifically the apple-sized wound through his gut.
She dismissed them for the time being, that could be addressed later.
Calamate jolted and whirled around, his eyes fixed upon her and widened slightly. Artoria, where is Akal? He cried out, looking around. I cannot. I need to find her. I need her here now. And you thought howling to the sky like a dog would bring her here? Artoria cut him off, frowning behind her helmet at him. Calamate stilled at her words but didn't respond. When last we spoke, you pledged to go and collect materials to build your kingdom. Hours later you returned from battle and mauling like a beaten dog, begging for the other servant to appear. I don't need, Calamate growled. His right hand came up and gripped his head while his left hand was raised towards Artoria. I need Akal here, now, where is she? She ventured out to find those I fought some days past. Artoria responded blandly. I suspect she will return soon. What has brought about this change in confidence? She remarked as she gestured him up and down, disappointment palpable in her tone of voice.
I found the servants I just need. Calamate lowered the hand. I need to find Akal. I need to ask her. What do you need to ask her? Artoria inquired, cocking her head to the side, and judging from the state you are in, I assume you found and did battle with the hostile servants. I fought them, yes. You won then. I left.
You retreated? No, Calamate shook his head, looking past Artoria and making it perfectly clear his mind wasn't all present in the conversation. I need Akal here. I need to know I'm not doing this for myself.
You left. Artoria sharply cut him off, glaring at him from behind her helmet. You left battle. You were not even forced to retreat as much as you just departed. You made neither an attempt to call upon reinforcements as much as you just left and allowed your enemies to remain alive.
I had more important things to. No, you did not. Artoria once again stopped him from speaking further, marching towards him and raising her voice ever so slightly but maintaining its commanding nature. You preached of building a new kingdom and yet, with all these ideals, you have done nothing to ensure that a strong foundation was built. You did not go out and destroy the enemy servants after I reported them to you, even after you had decided to abandon your naive plan. You encounter another group of servants and you flee from them? She stopped a few feet from him, looking up into his eyes. Do you care for your dream at all? Do you even wish to bring about this kingdom?
Of course I do, Calamate roared, taking several steps backwards and pressing a hand against his chest. I do. It is what I want. It is. But what is the point if no one else desires it? He exclaimed, his voice dripping with emotion. I need to know I'm not doing this for myself. This isn't a future for me. It's a future for all dragons. Our chance. If they don't care for it, they don't even know why they're doing all of this, then what is the point of it?
He stabbed a finger over her shoulder towards the entrance. I saw one of them. I saw one of the knights who brought death to my people, who slew us all, and he told me, he said he didn't even hate us. He looked down at her, he didn't even think of us. Nothing, none of them did. They didn't care why they were killing us. They didn't care what they were killing us for. They just killed us and then nothing. The hand dropped. They built kingdoms and cities and civilizations, but they didn't care. Calamate looked down at Artoria. I need to know I'm doing this for them and they can see the future I'm building for their sake. If they can't see it then what good is it being a kingdom for all dragons if it is built solely upon my own desire? He turned away from her, raising both his hands and grabbing his head. I need them to know why they're killing and banishing the humans. I need them to understand what it is all for. If they don't understand then, he pulled his hands away, staring at his bloodied palms as his eyes widened. Then how am I different?
How are we different from those who slaughtered us? To the people of this land, I am akin to the flame kin. I need them. I need to know that. Calamate's head turned to Artoria. I need Akal to tell me that her children, my brethren, understand what it is all for. Artoria stared at him in silence. The only sound to be heard in the caves was Calamate's breathing.
Slowly, the lancer raised her arms towards the helmet upon her head. With a gentle twist she pried it from the top and pulled it from herself, exposing her features to the dragon. Pale blonde hair was bunned up at the bad, dull yellow eyes looked up at him without portraying a hint of emotion. The expression of Artoria was cool, not even an inclination that she had been affected by his words.
Twin black horns protruded from under her hair, jutting straight back from the side of her head as she stared at the taller servant.
What does the title, king, mean to you? Artoria spoke calmly, looking up at him and allowing the helmet in her hands to vanish into motes of light. Did you imagine that a king was one who would sit back and make commands? One who sat atop a throne and did not but point to his subjects to do his bidding? What did you think the title of king meant?
Calamate lowered his hand to his side. I do not know, he admitted quietly. Akal, you speak to me of things I do not know. Kingship, civilization, kingdoms, knights. How am I to know all this? Then listen. Artoria commanded, you believe a king to be nothing more than a leader. But there is more. A king is more than that. They are the one who protects their people, a duty to their country. You devote yourself to this country of yours, to this kingdom of yours, and you work to create it so that all may prosper. As a king, you will shoulder the burdens of your people because it is your duty to do so. Through whatever means lay before you, you should adhere to this path. But what is the point if no one else? That is precisely the point. Artoria stated in a calm tone of voice, silencing Calamate. To become a king, you will work harder than all others, you will lead all others through example and you will rise above the nature of them. You must accept that your vision is the vision that your kingdom needs most of all, and once your kingdom has been developed, when your people are safe and threats removed, then they might work to build upon themselves. What you describe, those knights who slew your kin for the kingdom they knew nothing of, that is how kingdoms are born. The soldier fights not for his own dream, but for the vision of their king. The vision they know their king holds within their heart. They fight with the belief you shall lead them into that age. You're asking me to shoulder the dreams of my people who know nothing of dreams? Calamate replied, gesturing to himself. I know nothing of dreams. I know nothing of what my kingdom will look like when I am finished. Did you believe me to have the complete vision of Camelot within my mind from the moment I began my quest until the moment I was crowned King of Britain? Artoria raised an eyebrow. Do you think that such a thing is possible? The kingdom grows, you wish to cut out the kingdom of the dragons and develop it as such. Then you must first shoulder the burdens of your people. But they don't know anything, he replied. They might have their own ideas, their own ways of doing things. And as their king, it is your ideas that must take precedence. Is it not you who will lead them to this kingdom? Is it not you who holds this dream of the future in their heart? Is it not you who makes this assertion? I do not want to be the gods. I do not want to command my kin to kill without them knowing what they are killing for. Then you should not have started this quest. Artoria's voice turned cold. If the path of kingship frightens you, then end it now. Abandon this dream for your future and let yourself fade into nothing. My knights fought for me. They fought with the belief that I would build Britain into a great kingdom. They did not question my methods nor did they doubt my intentions. From the moment they dedicated their swords to my service, they understood that fact. You're saying that only the king has a vision. All humans have dreams, it is the kings who takes precedence. Artoria closed her eyes. If that concerns you still, think on this. You are not fighting for the sake of your people's dreams. You are fighting for the sake they might have those dreams. Her eyes opened. That is what you shall do as king. It is more than simply relaying orders. It is a duty to the future, that your people will survive. Calamate looked away from her. So I carry their dreams, is that what you say? There are many paths of kingship. Each one will change the outcome of the country, but that does not alter their inception, the vision of the king. Calamate slowly turned his head upwards, to carry their dreams, and once the kingdom is built, they can have them. They fight for me without ever knowing why. They know you intend to bring prosperity to them, that should be more than sufficient. Does that not seem lonely to you? Calamate wondered aloud. To carry the future of your people without them ever understanding what it is you do for them? If you intend to complain, I did not say I did not understand. Calamate gently cut her off as he lowered his head to look down at her. If I do this, I will become like the gods. I will fight for a future I do not yet know, but I will fight for it all the same, and all my people need know is that I fight it for their sake. For the sake of my kingdom. Calamate muttered, looking past her. For the future we shall one day see. I will do it. I shall commit myself to it. Even if I do not understand in full, I shall fight for my people. That is it. Was that what Camelot was like?
Did you fight for those dreams and the prosperity of your country? I did. I see. Calamate nodded his head, his lip curling upwards. If that is the case, I'm sure it was a good kingdom. To fight for the sake of one's people, for the sake of the people's future. I understand that. Maybe that is why you came.
Artoria didn't respond immediately, instead she looked to the side. Might I ask something, Artoria? You may. Why did you answer the summons? Camelot was a kingdom of humans and I know enough with how you slew the dragon Vortigern. Yet you came and helped me, why? He looked down at her with curiosity. I do not know but I would like to understand.
Who knows? Artoria replied with an unconcerned tone of voice as she turned. The summoning could just as easily have been a random event. She raised the helmet up, gently sliding it back atop her head. It does not matter now, I am here and that is all that needs to be said.
Artoria marched away. Calamate watched her depart with a blank expression.
All right. He allowed, reaching up and grasping his forehead. To fight for the future so that his people could have dreams of their own? He could allow that. It would make his people no different from the Silver Knights when they rose up, entrusting their fates into his hands, but if his people were to have a future, he would have to do it. And, hey, good on Calamate. Which means the actors are getting assembled, the true determination has been found and we're entering the final. And what did a call snatch off the floor? Also her giant dragon noble phantasm. She literally can only use it for about the same length of time as Sieg. Not all that long because of the absurdly high mana cost. Even if she had a master who could afford it, she herself doesn't have the mana to withstand it for very long, so it balances out.
Tune in next time for oh, right, yeah. Alsana stats, right.
Alsana, the silent oracle servant. Caster strength, E.
Endurance, E. Agility, E. Mana, A. Luck, B. Noble phantasm, A. Aleum Lois, B. Anti-unit max target, 1, max range, 1 to 2.
Sword named after the kingdom itself, it can provide healing to allies touched by the blade.
Lud and Zalan, A. Anti-army max target, 100, max range. The twin beasts who followed Alsana's commands. They come to her summoning. Touched by her own abyssal nature, they now possess the attribute of dark to their bodies. They serve as something akin to divine beasts as a result, but they are more powerful against other divine beings who do not hold the attribute of dark. Capable of utilizing magical energy to launch crystals at their opponents. Defense of the Empty Throne. B++, Anti-Army, max target, 200, max range, 0 to 20. Her final stand against the chaos. She kept the demons at bay even as the old knights burned and the city fell to ruin. She protected the kingdom her husband built. This NP will raise the walls of Aleum Lois to trap those who need to be kept from the outside world and gradually freeze them. Has a conceptual advantage against demons and threats to humanity. Class skills. Item construction, D. Territory creation, A. Dark soul. A marks her as a fragment of Manus and one of his children. Grants the same benefits as divinity. Personal skills. Abyssal magic. C. Despite having a natural affinity for abyssal spells like her sisters, Alsana did not practice them as greatly. Therefore it is not as powerful. Cryomancy. She was able to control and produce frozen winds with ease. Has great mastery over ice. Aspect of fear, B, D. Ranked down because of the life she lived with the Ivory King. She can imbue a sense of fear within targets similar to that which she once felt. Though it is barely passing. Child of Manus. C. She has great influence over those with dark attributes to them. It is not a form of control, rather it makes communication with them more likely. If their own dark nature exceeds hers, the level of influence will decrease. Charisma of the Ice Queen. C. Though lacking in her husband's sheer presence, Alsana was just as capable in certain times. Though her charisma is more akin to a frozen chill that brings one's attention to her. For allies, it is a welcome sight for her to be on their side. For enemies, it can be seen as the chilled words of death. Summoning, I am Alsana, Queen of Aleum Lois. Though you serve as master now, know that there is only one I shall ever serve faithfully. However, I shall dedicate my service
temporary as it might be, to you. Dialogue 1. The heat of this place is surprising to me, but I am used to colder climates. Ensure it does not reach too high. Dialogue 2. Elaeum Lois was the city I aided as queen, though my true love was for its king, rather than its people. He loved them dearly, so I loved them in his stead. Dialogue 3. The master and servant relationship between us is of titles alone. I understand the rules of summoning but know that I do not put substance into your claim of rulership towards me. I am a queen who is faithful to her king, that is all. Dialogue 4. If you have Ermengild, the Ivory King. This presence, my king, you have come to this land too? I am glad to be with you once more and please do not hug me so tightly, we're in the open. Think of your image. Dialogue 5. If you have Ermengild, Alsana at Ascension 3. Well, is this not the clothes befitting of a royal? I would look beautiful whatever I wore. I'm not talking about whatever else I wore, I just want to know how I look now. It's befitting of being your queen, right? Why are you laughing? Dialogue 6. If you have Raim, the Fume Knight, the berserker of shadow who stalks the halls, he is the one who married my sister, is he not? I am warmed that she could find love akin to mine. Though his responses to her are brusque, I can tell he loves her deeply. He is, how do you say, a very shy brother-in-law. Dialogue 7. If you have Vendrick, I feel a great swell of pity for him. I can see he loved. No, he still loves, Nishandra true and holy, but her aspect, she would never be satisfied with all he could offer her. However, take heart, King Vendrick. I believe that there was a time where my sister did truly love you as well. Dialogue 8. If you have Nishandra, my sister of want, she yearns for all and is never truly satisfied with what she gains. Her desires continue on, her fulfillment is fleeting. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to compare her to a leech that never has its fill. You think my words are harsh, but that does not make them any less true. I exist as proof we might overcome our nature. She found a path with Vendrick and she turned her head. What occurred next, she brought upon her own neck. Dialogue 9. If you have Fabian, Knight of Elaeum Lois. Brave Sir Fabian, who sought to purge chaos before my king could do so. He lamented your end most deeply. That you tried to spare him from it, I thank you. Even if it did not succeed, I know you loved the king dearly as we all did. Dialogue 10. If you have Fabian after completing Camelot. I've noticed that brave Sir Fabian seems more on edge around the good Sir Bedivere. I wonder, does she realize? Oh, I'm sure she does. Perhaps it would be best to, I am a queen and they are a knight of mine. I am well within my rights to take interest in her life. Besides, do they not look cute together? Dialogue 11. If you have Demon Prince, champion of chaos, enemy of my husband and bane of our kingdom. Though you might desire life, I have no mercy for your kind. You, whose people took him from me, I shall never forgive you for this act. Know that you live only by the grace of your use, nothing more. Dialogue 12. If you have Zully, my sister of envy, though perhaps she overcomes it quite easily, the story of the witch Zully and her beloved Alva is quite the tale. I would very much like to meet the man who turned my sister's heart. Dialogue 13. If you have Carla, daughter of my sister and her slayer as well, though I see the act weighs heavily upon her mind, even as one of happenstance. If she would expect me to spurn her, she will be disappointed. I am a queen and she, a common girl. It is not for her to decide whether I might spurn her or not. Dialogue 14. If you have bearer of the curse, I would never forget the one who helped my husband, for that alone, she has my thanks. I see she too has the air of a queen about her, then we might speak as equals and then as friends. Dialogue 15. If you have Arthur, Artoria, a king of knights, you say? If there is one who deserves that title, it would be my husband. Do not look at me with such a knowing expression, it could be seen as insulting. What I declare is merely a statement of fact. My husband had the greatest knights of the land, fitting as he was the greatest knight of his land. Dialogue 16. If you have Alva, the wayfarer, do we have a type, perhaps, my sister Zully and I? This Alva is an outgoing man who brings out the best of her. I dare not speak with him at length though, my sister is the aspect of envy and I can feel her gaze upon me at times. His instance to call me, dear sister, is also peculiar. Dialogue 17. If you gave Eric Bloodaxe, does it surprise you that Bloodaxe speaks in my presence? It is Gunhild I talk with. The stories we exchange of our husbands found us common ground. She agreed not to attempt to curse me. Dialogue 18. If you have Anastasia, you believe us to be kindred spirits? Though we were from cold lands, there are differences. She never ruled as queen, although, I am sure she would have made an adequate ruler. Likes that which I like? The answer is obvious. It goes without saying. Why do you continue to stare at me expectantly? It is my husband.
Hates chaos, and all who come from it are those I cannot abide. My king would find my anger irrational, but it is not something I will forgive nor forget. I had to live in a world where he could not hold me in his arms because of chaos. Even if it is unbecoming of my stature, I will maintain that stance. Wish for the Holy Grail. I would very much like it if my king had come back from his final voyage, if he had returned victorious and not left me alone. If such a thing were possible.
Bond level 1. The sword I hold is of the same name as the kingdom. Do you understand what it means that my husband bestowed this upon me? He knew my nature, and loved me all the same. Bond level 2. At times, I find your lack of courtesy for my stature vexing. Then I recall you are of the simple sort and that basic manners sometimes elude you. I can endure the disrespect you show, though do not show it to my husband. He deserves every ounce of respect. Bond level 3. Is the temperature in this room high, or is it just my imagination? No matter, I shall endure it. I shall endure it. For the sake of my own peace of mind, how does one control the temperature of this room? Should I not learn of it swiftly, I might just freeze everything to lower the temperature myself. Bond level 4. I am surprised you have not yet treated me differently. You cannot even claim ignorance of my true nature. You would willingly consort with a child of dark who is fear made manifest without once slipping face. I retract my earlier words. You never once showed disrespect, you treated me as you would any other. Though I would much prefer you at least address my station first and foremost.
Bond level 5. That you do not fear me, no, that you accept my true nature without so much as a blink of the eye. Very well then, I cannot allow this to stand any longer. From this moment forward, I declare you a citizen of Aleum Lois. This is a direct command from me. I shall brook no further comments on the subject. Take heart, you are of the like I would very much be proud of my husband for defending. Birthday. The passing of age is it. I see. Birthday. Bond level 5.
You have aged another year. Very well. The Queen accepts the need for a holiday. Spend your day how you wish. Should any approach you for work, inform them that Alsana, Queen of Aleum Lois and Silent Oracle, has decreed that you shall not be put to test for as long as this day goes on. It is only natural that a queen would care for her subjects. During an event, 'tis a loud day today, is it not? What is the source of this conundrum? First ascension. Ascension you call it. Interestingly, I can feel my soul thrum with life. Second ascension. My gown has cleaned up, yet I wonder, is this truly the cloth befitting of the Queen of Aleum Lois? My husband never made mention of it, but that is. Third ascension. These royal white robes, these black highlights and this silver circlet. I truly look the image of a queen, do I not? Indeed I do. I realize that Ermengild would never wish for me to change myself for his sake, but I wish to look my best for him. Do not speak of what I have said here, I will loosen Lud and Zalin if you do. Fourth ascension. In truth, I wore this gown before. The day he proposed to me, where he asked me to be his queen. At that time, all I considered was what I could do to benefit from being at his side, but I shall wear this dress to remember what I used to be. When I wear this dress, I shall think only on how I will no longer let fear guide my hand. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.